call came on a Tuesday morning while I was still in my robe. I remember because I had just made my second cup of coffee. The good kind, the dark roast my husband Glenn used to buy in bulk from the grocery store on Maple. And I was standing at the kitchen window watching a cardinal sit on the fence post, just sitting there, perfectly still, like it had nowhere to be. I thought about how Glenn used to say cardinals were visits from people who had passed. His mother believed that. He was never sure if he believed it himself, but he liked the idea. Then my phone buzzed on the counter. It was my son, Nathan. "Mom," he said, and his voice had that particular flatness it gets when he's about to say something he knows I won't like. "I've been thinking about the hospital thing." I waited. "I don't think I can make it down for the surgery. Brianna and I already bought the tickets to Sedona. It's her birthday trip. We've had it planned since February." The cardinal flew away. "I want to tell you that I said something strong, that I told him exactly what I thought. But I didn't. I said, 'Okay, Nathan,' the way I had been saying okay to Nathan for 40 years. And after we hung up, I stood there in my kitchen and listened to the refrigerator hum and thought about how a person can know something is coming for a long time and still not be prepared for the moment it actually arrives. My name is Patricia. I am 66 years old. I live in Greensboro, North Carolina, in the house where I raised 3 children, in the same kitchen where I packed 1,000 school lunches, where I helped with homework at that table by the window, where Glenn sat every Sunday morning reading the newspaper even after everyone had switched to reading the news on their phones. He said he liked the feel of paper. I used to tease him about it. I would give anything to tease him about it now. Glenn died 14 months ago. Pancreatic cancer, the kind that doesn't give you much warning and doesn't give you much time. From diagnosis to the end was 9 months, and those 9 months were the hardest and most sacred of my life. We did hospice at home, which was what he wanted. I slept on a cot next to his hospital bed in the living room for the last 2 months. I held his hand while he slept. I learned how to adjust his IV line. I learned things about my own capacity for love that I did not know were in me. All 3 of my children came for the funeral. I will say that. Nathan flew in from Phoenix. My daughter Lee came from Columbus with her husband, a man named Greg, who I've never particularly warmed to, but who behaved well that weekend and shook hands with people at the reception. My younger daughter, Cassie, drove up from Charlotte. They were all there. They hugged me. They cried. Lee gave a reading at the service that made the whole church go quiet. Then they all left, and the house became very still. In the months that followed, I learned a great deal about what grief actually looks like from the inside. People imagine it as sadness, mostly, a kind of deep, sustaining sadness that you carry, and it is that. But it is also disorientation. It is reaching for a person in your mind 100 times a day, wanting to tell them something, wanting to ask them something, and finding only air. It is sleeping in a bed that is too large. It is making 1 cup of coffee instead of 2, and then standing at the window wondering why you feel so wrong. I called my children regularly. I want to be clear about that because I've heard people say, well, you have to reach out, as if the problem is always on the parent's side. I called, I texted, I sent pictures of things I knew they would find funny. I drove to Columbus for Lee's birthday in October, and I brought the lemon cake she had requested, and I sat at her kitchen table while she talked mostly about a work conflict I couldn't quite follow, and a renovation they were thinking about doing to the master bath. She did not ask me much about how I was doing. I assumed she was tired. People are tired. By November, the calls were getting shorter. By December, I was sometimes calling and not hearing back for 3 or 4 days. I had a routine checkup in January, and my doctor found something. A mass in my abdomen, small, possibly nothing. Possibly nothing is a phrase designed to terrify people while pretending not to. She wanted to do a laparoscopic procedure to get a better look. Outpatient, she said. Low risk. But you'll need someone to drive you and to stay with you the first night. I told my children, all 3 of them. Lee said she would check with Greg. Nathan said he and Brianna had already booked the Sedona trip. Cassie didn't answer for 2 days, and when she did, she said she was really slammed at work and asked if maybe I had a friend who could take me. A friend who could take me. I sat with that for a while. I did have a friend who could take me. Her name is Barbara, and she has been my neighbor for 22 years, and she didn't hesitate for a single second when I called her. She said, "What time do I need to be there?" That's who Barbara is. She brought a tote bag with magazines and snacks, and she sat in that waiting room for 3.5 hours. And when the doctor came out and said the mass appeared benign and they'd watch it over the next 6 months, Barbara cried with relief right there in the waiting room. Actual tears. None of my children called that day until I called them. I want to pause here because I think about this moment a lot. I drove home from the hospital and I sat in the driveway for a few minutes before going inside, and I thought about the years. Not bitterly, not right then, just thinking. I thought about Nathan at 9 years old with a broken arm, and how I drove 80 miles an hour to the emergency room and sat next to him for 6 hours while they set it and casted it, and how he fell asleep against my shoulder at 2 in the morning, and I didn't move for 2 hours so I wouldn't wake him. I thought about Lee's miscarriage 3 years ago, and how I drove to Columbus without being asked. Just drove and stayed for a week and made food and rubbed her back and watched bad television with her at midnight because she couldn't sleep. I thought about Cassie at 22, lost and depressed after a bad breakup, and how Glenn and I had her live with us for 4 months, and how Glenn drove her to therapy every Wednesday because she didn't trust herself behind the wheel when she was that low. I sat in that driveway and I thought, was there a point when they stopped seeing me as their mother and started seeing me as a fixture? Something permanent and low maintenance, like the house itself. Something that would simply be there, requiring nothing, available when needed. I went inside and I fed the cat, and I did not call anyone. Glenn had wanted a memorial service, not the funeral. The funeral had been the standard thing, the church, the reception, the people coming through with casseroles and kind eyes. But Glenn had wanted something separate, something smaller and more intentional, held a few months after when the dust had settled. He had mentioned this to me more than once. He said he didn't want people coming to a service when they were still in shock, still performing grief. He wanted people who would come when the rawness had passed, who would sit quietly and actually remember him. I planned it for late February. I rented a small room at the community center, the one with the big windows that looks out onto the garden. I put together a slideshow of photographs. I ordered Glenn's favorite food, which was an embarrassingly simple spread, pulled pork from the barbecue place on Elm, coleslaw, cornbread. Glenn was not a complicated man about food. I set up 44 chairs. I thought that was more than enough. My children all said they would come. All 3 of them. Nathan said he and Brianna would drive down. Lee said she and Greg would be there. Cassie said of course. The evening before, Lee called to say that a pipe had burst in the basement and things were chaotic and she wasn't sure. I said I understood. She did not confirm either way. The morning off, I got a text from Nathan at 9:47. The service was at 11. "Hey Mom, I'm so sorry. Brianna surprised me with tickets to the Diamondback spring training this weekend. We're actually already at the stadium. I feel terrible. I'll make it up to you. Give Dad my love." I read it twice. Give Dad my love. Glenn had been gone for 8 months. Cassie called an hour later. Her voice had the careful quality of someone who had rehearsed what they were saying. She and her boyfriend, Derek, had made plans to brunch with his family weeks ago, and she had forgotten to put the memorial on her calendar, and she was sorry, she was really sorry, she'd come by later in the week. I put on my coat. I drove to the community center. I sat in the room with the big windows, and I watched people come in. Glenn's old colleagues, our neighbors, a few people from our church, his sister Claire, who had driven 4 hours from Virginia Beach without a word of complaint. 41 people came. 3 chairs were empty at the front, where I had placed them for my children. I do not think I will ever be able to explain what those 3 empty chairs looked like. Glenn's sister sat next to me and held my hand. She didn't say anything about the chairs. No one did, but I could see people noticing. After it was over, I stayed to help fold them up. and I thought about how Glenn's sister had driven 4 hours, how Renee from down the street had bought flowers she'd cut from her own garden that morning, how Glenn's old work friend Arthur had cried openly during the slideshow and then apologized for crying, and I had told him, please never apologize for that. I drove home and I sat at the kitchen table for a long time. The cat came and sat on my feet, the way cats do. The calls started coming the next week. Nathan first, he was sorry, he felt terrible. He knew it was unacceptable, but also, could I possibly loan them a little money? They were having a tough month. The Sedona trip had been more expensive than expected, and Brianna had had some car trouble, and they were just a bit short on the mortgage. I said I needed to think about it. Lee called a few days after that. Not about the memorial. About a vacation they were planning for the summer, a rental on the Outer Banks, and was there any chance I could help with the deposit? They had stretched thin with the renovation. You know how it is, Mom. You know how it is. I sat down at the kitchen table with a notepad and I did something I had never done before. I wrote down every financial thing I had given each of my children in the past 5 years. Not loans, gifts. Down payment assistance for Nathan's house in Phoenix, $30,000. The car I bought Cassie when hers died the year before last, $11,000. The credit card bills I had quietly paid for Lee twice during hard stretches, over $8,000 across both times. I stared at those numbers for a while. Then I wrote down something else. Every time in the past 2 years that I had needed something, not money, just presence. Glenn's surgery preparation appointments that I went to alone, the night before his diagnosis when I called all 3 of them and no one answered and I sat on the back steps until midnight. The first Thanksgiving after the funeral, which I spent with Barbara and her family because none of my children were able to host, and Lee said travel was just too much that year. I folded that piece of paper up and put it in the kitchen drawer. The following week, Cassie came by, unannounced, which was unusual. She sat down at the kitchen table and she looked at me in a way she hadn't looked at me in years, really looked, like she was actually seeing me. She said she had been thinking about the memorial. She said she had thought about it every day since. She said, Mom, I'm ashamed of myself. I don't have a good excuse. I had a bad excuse, and I used it because it was convenient, and I have been living with how that feels ever since. I didn't say anything right away. I let her sit with the silence. She said Derek had actually mentioned it to her. Derek, her boyfriend, who I have met only 3 times, he had said, you missed your father's memorial for brunch with my parents, who you see every month. He had said it gently, she told me, not as an accusation, just as a statement. And she said something about hearing it from someone outside the family made it land differently, made it real. I thought about what to say. I thought about the version of this conversation where I told her it was fine, it was okay, of course I understood, we all make mistakes. I had been having that version of this conversation my entire motherhood. Things that were not fine, smoothed over. Things that hurt, quickly covered. I said, Cassie, I need you to understand something. The chairs were empty. I sat in that room with your father's friends and his sister, people who drove hours to be there. And the 3 chairs I put at the front for my children were empty. I will not pretend that didn't happen. She started crying. I did not rush to comfort her. That might sound cold, but I want to be honest. I sat there and I let her cry, and I felt something shift in me. Some accommodation I had been making my whole life, closing just slightly. Then I said, I love you. I want a relationship with you. But I need you to be honest with me about what I mean to you, because I can handle the truth. What I cannot handle is being told one thing and shown another. She nodded. She was wiping her face with the back of her hand. She stayed for dinner. We ordered takeout and watched an old movie and she fell asleep on the couch. And I covered her with the throw blanket, the blue one that's been on that couch for 15 years. I stood there looking at her for a moment. My daughter, 40 years old, asleep under an old blanket. And I felt the complicated weight of it all. Not just anger, not just hurt, But love, too, the stubborn, unshakable kind that doesn't require being deserved. Nathan called 2 weeks later. Not about the money anymore. He said Brianna's parents had helped with the mortgage. He called to apologize. It was a longer conversation than we'd had in months. He talked about feeling overwhelmed, about how the distance from home made everything easier to set aside, about how he thought about his father every day, but didn't know how to talk about it. He cried. I had not heard Nathan cry since the funeral. I sat in the kitchen with the phone pressed to my ear, and I let him cry, and I said, I know you miss him. I did not say everything was okay. I said, I hear you. Lee and I have spoken twice since the memorial. It is still cool between us. Greg, I think, has some influence there that I do not fully understand, some way of minimizing the importance of things that are important. I do not know if Lee and I will find our way back to what we were. I am trying to be honest with myself about that uncertainty instead of managing it away. I didn't lend Nathan the money. I transferred a small amount, less than half of what he asked for, and I told him it was the last time without a real conversation about money and expectations. He said he understood. I don't know if he did. I called a financial planner named Diane, a woman my friend Barbara had recommended, and I had a conversation I should have had years ago about boundaries, about what my retirement actually required, about the difference between helping and enabling. She wasn't harsh about it. She just laid things out in plain language and asked me what I wanted the next 20 years of my life to look like. I said I wanted to be present for the people who were present for me. I said I didn't want to spend my 70s feeling resentful, and I didn't want to spend them feeling taken advantage of. I said I wanted to travel. Glenn and I had a list: Portugal, the Canadian Rockies, the coast of Maine. We had put it off, the way you put things off, when you assume there will be time. Diane nodded and said, Then let's make sure you can do that. I want to tell you about something I found in March, going through the last of Glenn's things in the study. He had a wooden box on the shelf, dark walnut, the kind with a little brass latch. I had seen it 100 times. I assumed it held old tax documents or warranty cards for appliances we no longer owned. It held letters, not letters to me. I had all of those. These were letters he had written and never sent, to each of the kids, one for each of them and one for me. I don't know when he wrote them. The paper was not yellowed, but the ink had a quality of having been there a while. I read mine first, sitting on the floor of the study with the box open on my lap. I won't share all of it because some of it is mine and I want to keep it that way. But he wrote about watching me over 41 years, about the specific things he had noticed, not grand gestures, small things, the particular way I took care of people, the way I was always the one to notice when someone in a room needed something before they asked. He wrote, I am afraid I watched you give and give without always saying how much I saw. So I'm saying it now. I saw all of it. I sat on that floor for a long time. The letters to the children, I have not given them yet. I'm holding on to them. I'm not sure why exactly. Maybe because I'm not ready. Maybe because I want to give them at the right moment. Cassie's, I think, would help her. Nathan's, I'm not sure he's in the right place yet. Lee's, I am still figuring out where Lee and I stand. I am not in a hurry. For the first time in a long time, I am not trying to manage everyone else's feelings. I am trying to manage my own. There is a woman from my church named Helen who started calling me after the memorial. She had heard, I think, through the gentle underground of people who care about each other, that the service had been hard for me. She did not ask me about it directly. She just called and said she was going to the botanical garden on Saturday, and would I like to come? I said yes. We have been going most Saturdays since. She is 73, and she lost her husband 6 years ago, and she is one of the funniest people I have ever met. She makes me laugh in a way I had forgotten I could. We drink bad coffee from the Botanical Garden Cafe, and we walk slowly and we talk about everything. Barbara is still Barbara. She brought over soup last week for no reason, just soup, in a container she didn't need back. My granddaughter, Nathan's daughter, Olive, who is 7, video calls me every Sunday. She does not know about any of this. She calls to show me her drawings and to tell me about her teacher, Ms. Peterson, who she has decided is the best person alive. I sit on the couch with the phone and I watch Olive's face, that open, uncomplicated face of a 7-year-old, and something settles in me that nothing else settles. Glenn is in that too. I can see him in her forehead, in the way she laughs. I am still in this house. I have thought about selling it. Thought about a smaller place, a condo maybe, something that doesn't need as much keeping up. I haven't decided. The kitchen still has the window where I watch birds in the morning. The cardinals come and go. I am not the same woman I was before that February morning when I sat in a room with 3 empty chairs. Something changed in me, not a closing off exactly, but a clarifying. I can see more clearly now what is mine to carry and what is not. I can feel the difference between the love I give because I want to and the accommodations I make because I'm afraid of what will happen if I don't. I am learning at 66 to tell the difference. It is not a small thing to learn this late, but I do not think it is too late either. Glenn used to say, better honest and uncomfortable than comfortable and hollow. He said it about a lot of things. I am finding out he was right about this one too. I keep thinking about those 3 chairs at the front of the room. I had placed them there myself, the morning of the memorial, arranged them just so, close enough to the slideshow that my children would be able to see Glenn's face clearly. That's the kind of thing you think about when you're planning something like that, where your children will sit, whether they'll be able to see. What I've come to understand, slowly and not without some resistance, is that what happened that day was not an accident. It was the result of years of small choices, theirs and mine both. Every time I smoothed something over that deserved to stay rough, every time I said, it's fine, when it wasn't, every time I absorbed the cost of someone else's carelessness so they wouldn't have to feel it, I was teaching people how I expected to be treated. I didn't know I was doing it. I thought I was being a good mother. And I was, in many ways. But there is a version of goodness that quietly trains the people you love to take you for granted, and I had been practicing that version for a very long time. Glenn saw it. He wrote it plainly in that letter, the one I found on the floor of his study, that he had watched me give, and he was afraid he hadn't said enough about how much he saw. Reading that, I felt 2 things at once, grateful and something harder to name. Because seeing clearly is its own kind of moral act. It requires honesty, the willingness to look at what's actually in front of you instead of the version you wish were there. I hadn't been doing that. I had been choosing comfort over clarity for years. What Cassie did, coming back, sitting down, saying I'm ashamed of myself without a caveat, that took something real. It would have been so easy to stay away, to let the awkwardness calcify into distance. A lot of adult children do exactly that. Instead, she chose to feel the weight of what she'd done and then walk toward it rather than away. That kind of courage doesn't come from nowhere. It has to be practiced, chosen, sometimes against every instinct that says it's easier to just let things go quiet. I don't know if I gave her that or if she found it herself. Maybe both. I hope both. Nathan and I are still finding our way. He called, he cried, he said things that were true. That's not nothing. Whether it becomes something more depends on choices he hasn't made yet. Lee, I don't know. I am learning to sit with not knowing instead of rushing to resolve it. What I do know is this. I am 66 years old and I am not willing to spend whatever time I have left managing other people's comfort at the expense of my own. That's not bitterness. That's just clarity, arrived at late, but arrived at honestly. Glenn used to say, the truth is only hard the first time you say it out loud. After that, it gets lighter. I'm finding out he was right about that too. He was right about a lot of things I didn't fully hear until he was gone. I am learning to hear them now. That feels like the least I can do for both of us.